I just want to set some intentions for today because, you know, we don't want to do all of this good stuff and not know where we're going. So I'm going to go through with a few slides to just generally take you through what we're hoping to, the change that we're hoping to see. We actually developed what we call an engineer of record, architect of record policy that we've been sharing with the various government agencies. In particular, the Minister of Public Works, we met with him concerning it. And we had some early discussions with the Minister of Financial Services. And so our intentions coming out of this event is we're looking at early engagement of construction professionals, all right? We don't want to find out about the jobs when it's either under construction, in the paper, you know, the usual way. So we're looking for early engagement. We're asking for them to set minimum partnership requirements, just like how they may go on a job not too far from here, start counting the people on the job, and say, well, we don't see enough Bahamians, all right? We're also looking to transfer more liability to consultants. So we're saying, give us something and we'll give you something. And I'll talk a bit more about that. And we're also looking to accelerate the permit approval and inspection processes. So when we talk about at what stage do we want to be engaged, all right? And so we believe that engineers of record, architects of record, other construction professionals should be engaged as a part of the foreign direct investment approval process. I don't think it's unreasonable to ask the investors to provide a letter from the professionals saying that they've been engaged. You know, so we know for the building projects, you need your architect, your structural civil engineer, MEP engineer. Of course, I forgot the environmentalist. And then fee split. And I know, well, this wasn't a very comfortable conversation when I had it at the ministry, but I figure if you don't ask, you're not going to get. You know, so do we want to agree some sort of minimum fee split so that, you know, because I think what happened is a lot of people don't realize the money that's missing out because it's almost invisible. Like these drawings just show up, but there's money spent on producing these drawings. And if you're talking about projects that are valued in the hundreds of millions of dollars, the fees resulting from that would be in the tens of millions of dollars. And we know that what's happening is you may have a foreign investor, foreign design team, and so the money never even enters the Bahamas. It goes from one foreign bank to the next. It doesn't attract business license fees, value-added tax, and any of that other revenue. And it also doesn't come into the industry to benefit the growth of the industry, to increase employment, training, et cetera. And in most cases right now, you have the international engineers being the ones to hire the Bahamians. But I mean, this is the Bahamas. Maybe it should be the other way around, okay? Construction administration. You know, I'm currently in a mini fight with one of my clients who thinks I'll sign off on a job that I didn't see go up. You know, because I'm the engineer of record, I sign off on the drawings. But at the end of the day, if you're looking for sign-off to say that the project has been installed and according to the drawings, then, you know, we also need to see the installation going in. And their argument is that they don't see anything in writing that tells them they have to engage the engineer of record for construction administration. And that's a loophole that some persons use, sometimes to behave badly. I'm not loud enough? Oh. Okay. And that's standard practice elsewhere in other jurisdictions. That if you sign off on the drawings, you need to inspect at a sufficient level that you can say the installation has been done in compliance with the drawings, okay? But we don't have that, we don't seem to have that written anywhere. Now, on us, you know, if we're asking the legislators to put these systems in place, we also need to provide some level of assurances ourselves. We need to have insurance, you know, across the board, and maybe we need to set a minimum level of insurance. And I think that if we bargain for our insurance through as a group, as opposed to going individually, the hope is that we can get more favorable rates, okay? And I didn't know this until recently. Apparently the architects have to take their business license and their PEB license proof to the building control department at the beginning of each year. I didn't know that. As engineers, I've never been asked to do that. And so perhaps we need to make that across the board to make sure that the drawings coming in are submitted by persons who have complied with their tax and other obligations. Now, building capacity. This is a big one for me. I know it was like coming back home from school, knocking on doors. I did, you know, any job I could get coming out of school, and they were all not related to engineering because it was so difficult. But if we introduce some sort of a requirement that, you know, you need to train some graduate engineers, something, I'm not quite sure how we can do it, but this is one I'd like to see us do. Because what we need to realize, we need to see the big picture. If I say, well, okay, I'm only going to concern myself with my firm and nobody else, the industry cannot grow. When the students come home from school, summer, Christmas break, we need to provide them with opportunities so that they can learn and so we can encourage them to come back. We're never going to be able to say, well, this is a medium-sized hotel. The entire project can be done in the Bahamas if we don't start training up graduate engineers, okay? Fee schedule. We had a meeting with Minister of Public Works, who's a lawyer, and when I told him that we had no agreed fee schedule for engineering and architectural services, he couldn't believe it. You see? So we're currently operating kind of like the Wild Wild West, where everybody just kind of does their own thing. But it really would be to our benefit if we developed a fee schedule. I've been doing some research on it, and it's easy to find what the Americans are doing and the Canadians. That information is easily available. They develop the fees based on the type of the building and the cost of the building, and then some jurisdiction add in a percentage based on complexity. And so if we even had some general guideline, even if everybody didn't stick to it all the time, so a way of pricing to take the mystery out of it, and also some sort of ranges for, well, if you're a principal engineer, this is what is expected as your hourly rate. You want to jump in and say something?
Just as a point of information, the Institute of Payment Office some years ago established a recommended fee schedule for if I had known to have it for example, it does divide it by building type and complexity and miscellaneous fees for the design professional. And that booklet was developed many years ago, and the members were encouraged to give that to potential clients just as a guideline as to what type of fees they should be expected to pay and what the services of an architect and an engineer should be. So I could get some of that information to you so that you can have a basis or a platform here on which to start your discussion on your end.
Okay, so thank you. So what I should have said is I was told that there was this document that existed. That was mentioned, but at the time I couldn't get anybody to show it to me. And then again, and thank you very much for sharing that. That's Sean Farrington from Diamond, my consultant group. And so again, we need to not be acting like secret agents, right? If that fee schedule is available, perhaps it should be published in the newspaper annually, or, do you see what I'm saying? We need to share information and be a lot more transparent with what we're doing, okay? So, but thank you very much for that. Then, this whole idea of professional development hours, we really need to introduce it. It is standard in the industry, and it's important, you know, to remind yourself to refresh. As I practice, I realize that a lot of us are not as familiar as we need to be with the basic document, which is the Bahamas Building Code. You know, oftentimes you're arguing with somebody about something that's in the code, and they're going on memory. I don't know about any of you, my memory is not getting better as I get older, okay? And so it's important to just say, well, look, let's just go back to the code, let's look for that particular reference. But I think it would be useful to make sure that all of the professionals practicing have a basic understanding of the code and professional ethics. I find those courses to be quite useful. I am licensed in Florida, and so I have to do 18 hours every other year. And it's a pain, but every time I do the ethics course and the other courses, you know, it kind of refreshes you and reminds you that you need to constantly keep yourself as sharp as possible. So I know the Professional Engineers Board is working on introducing something. I don't know about the Architects Board. But this is one that the lawyers, they don't do this as yet. Accelerated approvals and third-party inspectors. So this is, again, a topic we've been discussing with the Ministry of Works, and the Ministry of Works, I guess, has been looking at it for a number of years, but we need to move beyond talking, and we need to start doing something about it. Because when you think about it, I don't know if any of you have had the experience of submitting drawings and 90 days later, 120 days later, and I can go on. No approval, no answer, no anything. But if we're saying that we universally agree that the persons on this list, meaning the PEB and PAB lists, are licensed, they have insurance, maybe we need to pass a bit more liability over to those persons, right? And find a way to accelerate the approvals. And it doesn't have to be for, well, I'd like to see accelerated approvals on everything, but there could be different processes based on the complexity of the building. So if it's a restaurant with a lot of ventilation, if it's a mini hospital or a clinic with medical gases, you may want to, use a different procedure than if it's an office building. But what happens when we have projects stuck in a department is that the money doesn't get released for the project to start getting under construction. People are not able to work. The opening of businesses are delayed. And so these are real issues that are affecting our economy that I don't think any particular effort has been put into quantifying those, but those are realities that we're all, I believe, aware of. And then this is the final one that, I think it may be a tougher hurdle to climb, because this one, all the others I talked about were changing policy. But here we need to change legislation. Right now, the Local Government Act is written in such a way that the persons who are elected to, I don't know if they call them the Town Planning Committee or Local Government Committee, we empower them with the powers of the Building Control Officer. Now, when in your Providence, in order for you to be a building control officer, you need to be a licensed architect or a licensed engineer. So that means you have to have a degree and some further training that enables you to be licensed, and chances are you also have to have some years of experience. But right now, this provision, to me, is potentially dangerous because it says, regardless of your prior experience, you get to decide if a building is safe or not. This needs to be addressed, okay? And so that's going to be one of our big topics discussion today. And so from today, we hope to also form a working committee so that we can develop the policy, monitor the industry, and monitor progress. So I just thought I would go through those slides to set the tenor of the day. And if we're ready, we can go through, start with our panel. So what I'm going to, again, we're being informal, so if you just turn on your mics one at a time, I guess, and just introduce yourself for me, please. Just say a few things about yourself, and so our group can know who you are.
Okay. Good morning. My name is Candia Ferguson. I am the Director of Investments at Bahamas Investment Authority. For those of you who do not know, our job at Bahamas Investment Authority is to be the one-stop shop for investors and to be basically their first port of call when they come into the Bahamas, when they come to present their proposals. And basically, we facilitate the approval process and the actual development of the project.
Okay.
Good morning as well. My name is Dudley Francis. I'm a professional engineer, and I'm here representing the Grand Bahama Port Authority. And in Grand Bahama, we have a unique experience in that the GBPA is responsible for all regulations, which would include any building permitting, any plan reviews that would come into our department. Within that department, I am the chief building manager, so I have oversight of all of the permitting aspect of my department. And one thing I would encourage all of us who are here as engineers and architects is that when you are practicing in Grand Bahama, you need to be a licensee of the Port Authority. And so in addition to your professional certification, when you're doing work in Grand Bahama, you need to have a business license there. So that's the one main thing I'd like to mention. The good thing for us in Grand Bahama is that we also have what is equivalent to a one-stop shop. So all the permitting would go through our department. The turnaround time, therefore, because we have direct control over it, is when compared to other areas, it's much shorter. And you're able to liaise directly with us. And the same thing also applies when dealing with foreign direct investors. We usually hold their hands from conception stage all the way through to construction. So for our section of dealing with building permitting, that sort of governance, it's a unique experience in Grand Bahama.
Okay, thank you very much. So, Ms. Ferguson, can you explain to us what is the FDI approval process? What's that like?
Well, firstly, we would have, and I'm not going to go into great detail.
Sure.
But The general process is that a developer would come in with the idea of what they want to do here in the Bahamas. They would meet with the Bahamas Investment Authority, and they would submit their application, which would give us an idea as to the scope of the project, the capital investment, any environmental concerns, any requests for work permits, that sort of thing. So we get a general application that we would look at. And what we do is we would submit it to the various government agencies for their commentary, for their initial commentary, before we take it to the NEC, which is the National Economic Council, a subcommittee of cabinet, who would then issue an approval in principle. That approval in principle would be subject to the various government agencies being in compliance with, say for example, BEST, Ministry of Works, and then depending on the complexity of the project, we would, the NEC would then recommend the BIA to negotiate along with the Office of the Attorney General and other relevant government agencies a heads of agreement. And that heads of agreement would basically be the document that governs the development of the project generally. And that sets out basically the obligations of the developer, the obligations of the government.
Okay, so that process, is that information available publicly, like on a website somewhere, so that the general public or an investor could have sight of the whole process?
Okay, it is on site. We are actually in the process of doing a restructure and a strengthening in terms of our processes. So this is a very timely discussion for us, because a lot of the things that we would discuss with a developer or request of a developer, they are not legal requirements. They're more policy. So we would ask a developer to engage with a local environmental consultant. We'd ask them to, in fact, I was looking at some of our HOAs. Our wording is a little flowery sometimes. We'd invite them to engage and partner with local engineer, local architect, local contractor. So it's not really an obligation. It's an ask. It's, I don't think that if it was to, in terms of even legislation that we speak to in our HOAs, the only professionals that are actually covered in our HOAs are the real estate professionals. They are
I thought you were going to say the lawyers.
No. The lawyers don't have to worry about it because they're drawing up the documents, so they're okay. So from that perspective, we encourage. We sit down. We ask all these questions, and you said stories are very good. So I'm going to give you a story that happened to me just yesterday. I had an attorney, a developer, and they came and they showed me this beautiful plan of this development. It was wonderful, and and they give you the nice booklet, and you're looking through the booklet, and you're saying, "Oh, this is so nice. It looks like Malaysia. It looks like India. It looks like all these different places." And so, they obviously thought that I was very impressed because I kept writing, and in my notes it was project manager, architect, engineer, contractor, and then I had a big star, Bahamian. And when I asked them, they were sort of taken aback. It was, "Oh yeah, we'll get one, we'll get one." But obviously they had done a lot of detail. There was a lot of effort. When you get to the stage when you are producing a booklet and you are referencing American firms or whatever, and what struck me was that, and this is not a new developer in the Bahamas, but he used the expression, we'll get an engineer to sign off. And I guess for me, coming here, I really want to know what sign-off is, because it seems to me that sometimes sign-off is, or stamp or something, is just, you're signing off, but you're not really putting your Bahamian DNA into the project. So, I say all that to say that we do have policy, we do encourage it. I don't know if we have, well, I know we don't have the staff, or, I think we have the will. I think if you sit with government officials, they have the will to have Bahamians involved in projects, but I don't know if we have the capacity to monitor. So I think it's really good that when you have organizations as yourself who are willing to also assist us with the monitoring, because monitoring is a really big issue with all developments.
Okay, so thank you very much for sharing that story. No surprise there. But so when you talk about signing off, let me explain. I mean, what it really is, you're talking about taking on the role of engineer of record or architect of record, and that is clearly defined in statutes around the world. The one that I like to reference is the Florida Administrative Code. It has a very detailed definition of the roles and responsibilities. And so it would involve you being able to, you would have to have sight of calculations. You need to understand how the person would have arrived at their design. You need to have reviewed the design. I like to interview the person who has done the drawings so that I get an understanding. You should be able to even yourself reproduce the calculations or design, but of course, time would not permit. And you need to be able to be comfortable enough that you can answer questions on the design. All right, because you are taking on the liability. And so this is what is so objectionable about the process as it is, because you involve the Bahamian at the very end, right? And then that person, whoever signs, takes on the liability for everything that's been done. So let's see if we can bring Mr. Francis into the conversation. Tell us how, is there anything different done in Grand Bahama?
We have some of the same challenges in terms of the need to have more direct involvement from the local professionals. And so what we try to do at the GBPA from the onset, especially when dealing with a foreign direct investor, is to encourage them to get the local professionals involved from the very get-go. Don't wait until, like you just point out, they come up with these detailed designs, then you're going to bring the local engineer or architect in on the tail end, and they're not involved directly, even when it comes on to doing inspections, taking responsibility. Again, when we look at a project in terms of permitting at GBPA, we hold whoever sign off as the, whether it's the EOR or AOR, as the person responsible. And so if they're only just rubber stamping, then we are still going to hold them responsible. And so we still have some of those same challenges as well.
So exactly how are you able to involve the engineers and architects and other professionals earlier? Do you require some sort of proof that the person has been engaged?
That is an area where we probably need to be a bit more diligent. Let me give you one example. With most engineers, for example, or outside of the port area coming in, we would afford them, if they're working on a project, practicing in the port area, the first time they do so, we would not necessarily require a business license. But thereafter, we insist that they must become a licensee of the Port Authority. And with that requirement, we also require proof that they are current with their national license. And it really then drives the conversation how involved this individual or this entity is with this project. And so from the onset, we're asking those questions, and like you point out, we want to see proof that you are actually involved with the project.
Yeah, one of the things that we,
Can everyone hear Marcus, or do we need to get the mic?
thank you. One of the things we used to always suggest to the government is, in a case where you have someone coming to negotiate a heads of agreement or coming to do a project in the local jurisdiction, as a part of your submission should be some MOU or some contract between the developer and or the investor and their local professionals as a criteria to even be considered. So that's one of the things I think would be a good thing to do. When that package comes on the desk, you've identified your professionals and you've also submitted with that the contractual agreement or the signed MOU. That way, the professional can assist you in releasing this person going on with the work. Because sometimes we get a developer that engages a professional and say, hey, we want you to help us with this project, knowing full well they're not going to engage them contractually. So what ends up happening is once they get the approval based on the credence of that local professional, they then hire their foreign firm and just do the work, and no one follows up. No one comes on the back end and says, hey, weren't you working with this company? Where's the company now? So if that person is engaged contractually and they know, hey, this guy went ahead and worked with someone else when we had a contract, then they can approach the various authorities and say, hey, they breached the contract. You guys should stop their project or remove their approval.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I guess it's a question and a statement. I guess, Ms. Ferguson, in terms of the involvement of not only architects, engineers, etc., but also utility companies themselves, is that clearly documented regardless of who the minister is in terms of what the procedure is? And the reason I'm saying that, from the utility perspective, there are times when we get the heads agreement, everything's already signed, there's been no involvement, etc., depending on who the minister may or may not be. So is that clearly documented as a policy, or does it change subject to whoever's dealing?
The procedure that we use and the procedure that I know it to be is that at least in the initial stages, we send out to all of the agencies, including the utility companies, for their comments on an HOA. And we would incorporate that based on their comments. Obviously, if there are things that from a policy standpoint, government decides to do, then policymakers that will influence what goes in the HOA. But from a technical standpoint, our office always solicits the comments from the various agencies, and they are represented. If not in the HOA, they are represented in our files so that we know what were the concerns at the time of the various agencies.
I mean, in conjunction with that, what Marcus brought up as well, is there also a document when investors are at the interest stage only that tells them exactly what they need to do such that they can engage the behemoth professionals in all of the preliminary work, as compared to doing all the preliminary work and you only find out after it's come? Because a lot of the money also is in preparing those documents for submission, on whether or not at the inquiry stage when they just express an interest, is a document that can be handed out to them, so it's A, B, C, D, etc. You must engage A, B, C, D, etc. on all that preparatory work that's being done in compiling the proposals and everything else at that stage. Is there such a thing as well that they would have?
There doesn't exist such a thing. And I think that one of the challenges that we have is most of the time when persons come in to sit down with their development, with their conceptual design or all of that, they've already done it. Like I think that when they come to us, and maybe this is something in discussions with other professionals, namely lawyers, maybe, because they've come to the country, they sit down with their lawyer, they say, this is what we want to do, here is the plan. So there's a degree of work that is done even before they decide to purchase the property in some cases. You know, they'll identify a property, how the purchase will work is if you're purchasing, say, property for a development, you would not get the permit, and the permit is what allows you to purchase the property, unless and until you have an overall approval in principle for the development. So if I am a developer and I see, say, a piece of property in Exuma that I like, and I enter an agreement for sale, the agreement for sale is contingent on you getting the permit. So when they're looking at this piece of property, they're gonna do a degree of work that, okay, conceptually, this is what I want it to look like, to an extent, and then they come and present it to us. So I think we're somewhat limited on how we can do that. I mean, obviously, this is a discussion that, I don't know if we put it online before you approach your attorney, or before you actually come to the country, before you enter into your thought process. But generally what we find is that I would say 9 out of 10 of the developers that I've seen, there's some conceptual before they've actually even closed the purchase, gotten the approval in principle, and obviously money has been spent.
Okay, so the permit that you're talking about is you're talking about a building permit?
No.
Oh, what permit is that?
Okay, sorry. When you have a foreigner who wants to purchase property for a commercial purpose, they have to apply to the government for a permit to allow them to complete that purchase. Now, in the case of a development, that is when we would ask for the project proposal. So the project proposal is then taken to the NEC, and you get approval in principle for the project, and the issuance of the permit will come at the same time.
Okay, so there seems to be an opportunity there to introduce the requirement for the construction professionals. Say again? Right, up front. Before I go to you, Derek, Mr. Francis, do you want to add anything as to what happens in Grand Bahama, if it's any different, or?
Not much of a difference there. Again, with us, we try to strike a balance between not turning away investors, but at the same time getting our local professionals involved in whatever development come on stream. And so with us, a lot of the areas where we have the challenges would be where we more or less have in place policies as opposed to like having a legal framework to enforce that need or that desire to get the locals involved at what stage of the process.
So what policies do you have right now? It's just it's a document prepared by Grand Bahama Port Authority that's available somewhere that says you have to, so that's your policy there, but you're following, even though you're in Grand Bahama, of course, you're following the Professional Engineers Act, Professional Architects Act. And so you're saying with the implementation of the policies, you find it to be a bit challenging? Does it mean that it depends on who is in charge of implementing the policy, that things are different, or?
No, we're going to make sure that whatever is required from the acts are followed. But as far as like getting the locals involved, it's difficult to say they have to be involved before you get to the stage where the permit, where they actually submit documents to us.
Why?
I don't understand, excuse me, I have to explain to me why I'm difficult, because
Okay, okay, sure. And then we,
just want to, you said that you did not want 20 investors, that's a very, delicate dance, you don't want to fight that way, but with all due respect, I believe that any investor is coming to spend $100 million, and they see a defined policy or procedure that they should follow, but follow that. Because at the end of the day, they're coming here in an effort to make money. Okay, so, and if it means hiring and as Marcus pointed out, presenting a memorandum of understanding between local professionals as a part of your submission, they will do that.
Right.
But if it isn't there, if they are not required to do it, then they understand that they can circumvent it. And you know, so I'm sorry.
that's okay.
No, that's fine. And again, if there are loopholes in our process, we are open to closing those loopholes. We're definitely open to that. I wasn't necessarily saying that we would not enforce whatever requirements are required, whether it be from the Professional Engineers Board. I'm definitely not saying that. I'm just saying that in terms of our enforcement at whatever stage, it's not so much that we have a policy in place like a MOU to say they have to be involved at this stage versus that stage.
Derek,
Yes. Ms. Ferguson, you indicated that developers coming in the Bahamas Investment Authority is somewhat of a one-stop shop. Is that what you said?
I think so, yes.
Okay,
That is the intention. The intention.
that is the intention.
Yeah, the intention is really for us to collaborate with the various government agencies and to liaise with them to ensure that the process is as smooth as possible.
Okay.
Mhm.
And you know, normally developers come in with, you know, conceptual design, which is much different from final design that can go to construction. All right? It is always to the benefit of the developer to engage the local professionals as early as possible, because I've worked on many projects where by the time the drawings got to me, I could have saved you hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Right.
All right? And it would be an excellent thing, at least this is a start, to, at that point, really, and you use the word encourage, I think something more forceful is going to have to happen there. In reference to what's happening in Grand Bahama, developers are finding out that if they miss that step, and Mr. Francis, your office have rejected drawings and indicated that you have to go back and get
Right.
the signature of the professional engineer, which is very important. Sometimes, you know, it's like, it's after the fact, but we are gonna really, as professionals, need to ensure and encourage that we are engaged very, very early in the game. And I see the Bahamas Investment Authority as being one of the, you know, our partners in this. And then there's the Ministry of Works and, of course, the Grand Bahama Port Authority.
oh, go ahead.
And I guess this is really because, from a layperson's perspective, but is it, and this is supposed to be a discussion, so I guess my question is to all of you, when a conceptual plan is it feasible to say that a Bahamian architect or a Bahamian professional has looked at this conceptual plan? Is that something that we perhaps can ask for to say, that it's out there, that, don't come to us with a conceptual plan, that at least I've discussed this with a Bahamian professional? Is that creating too much of an obligation?
I would say that, I'm not quite sure we're getting feedback, but yeah, I would say that that would be exactly the right decision there to, when they, so let them know that, they need to provide a conceptual plan, and they need to provide their local consultants along with this plan. Because again, many times we see persons come with ideas. For example, I remember looking at something for cogeneration of, at one point, and they had the price of diesel at a price that we hadn't seen in the Bahamas for 30 years. So it was based on unrealistic numbers anyway. So, yeah, I think that that's what we're looking for. But I think what the starting point here then, the takeaway that I get from the conversation is that we need to have sight of the process. It needs to be written down and available somewhere, and then I think those of us from the industry would then be better placed to tell you exactly where it needs to be inserted, that please provide, but it has to be before the approval. And again, I appreciate what you're saying, that you're looking at it from a lay person's point of view, because what looks like, fantastical drawings, it could probably just be an artistic representation, something that could never be built. And I'm wondering if there is a need to have some technical involvement in looking at these. Because, when you send it to Ministry of Works, and I'm a former Ministry of Works person, so I can be a little bit bad, what do they do? What do they say? What do you ask them for? When, you say that as a step where it's taken to the Ministry of Works, what do you require of them? Do they look at anything? What do you ask, and what do they give you back?
Okay, so if, the point I was discussing earlier in relation to giving it to the relevant government agencies, at that point, initially they would, I would say at the very early stages, it's either this can't work or okay. So it's not a very technical, it's not a very technical opinion. It's once it is approved in principle, and then they look at it and say, for example, if we are in the process of negotiating a heads of agreement, and I'm actually involved in one right now where they keep saying to us that, listen, this conceptual plan that this developer has given us is not sufficient for us to work with. So at times they do say to us that it's not feasible for them to work with or to give proper feedback. But in terms of plans and anything that is very detailed, they would not be seeing it, it would not be submitted from us at that point. So what do you give them? Do you just give them a description, a picture? So you don't give them the full set of plans that they would have provided? Because I'm trying to see what is the usefulness, or what is it that we're trying to get from the Ministry of Works at that time? Because I think that seems as if that's another key step, the discussion with the Ministry of Works and the utilities when we're at the conceptual phase. And so if they are not, is there a file that's physically passed around, or is it emailed out, or
I'm just trying to figure out how the information is exchanged then.
Okay, we would take our, basically, those are our specialists. So if Ministry of Works asks for something a little bit in greater detail, then we would request the developer to provide it for us, and we would make sure that they get it. If the utilities company asks, one that I'm working on now where BPL would ask how much power is needed, what it's, and so it really depends on the nature of the development, what they're asking us for. Like, there's no set listing that I'll say, oh, Ministry of Works needs this, utilities needs the other.
So that's a gap.
I would say so.
I think that's a gap.
I would say
Because
so.
then it should be very clear to the developer what they are required to have. They should be required to have a site plan, you know, maybe a elevation, something, you know, so that what they are required to produce needs to be very, very clear at that point. If they're required to have some preliminary calculations for the utility, so that BPL can say, well, that's not going to be a problem providing. Also, water and sewage, they need to know, well, okay, well, we have the capacity to provide water and to serve that area with a sanitary line. So, okay, so I think we're,
I think what happens is that once the proposal comes in, all of the agencies then, you know, sit around the table and you'll hear what the various requirements are. The difficulty that we have sometimes is that not all agencies respond at the same time. So we then end up telling the developer, okay, BPL has said this, Ministry of Works has said this, tourism has said this, so it's all very piecemeal in terms of the response that we get from the agencies.
okay, so that's where your engineer of record and your architect of record could run interference for you. But what it seems as if, so first we need a list that everybody is agreed that this is what we need. And then if you have the local consultants in place, they can pick up the phone to somebody in BPL and say, well, this project was sent to you 2 weeks ago. How come you haven't answered? Right, Mr. Ferguson? Or you call, you know, your other Mr. Ferguson at the Building Control Department. Well, how come we haven't heard from you? We need a response. So,
I think it's important that we distinguish between what stages we're talking about. Because prior to getting an HOA, everything is still very airy-fairy conceptual. It's really, other than what the capital investment is, what the potential employment is, and that really from a policymaker standpoint is really what is the most important thing. So it's after we have the heads of agreement that I think then all those points that you made can then be enforced. It's really difficult prior to that HOA to, I'm not saying it's impossible, but I think that what happens is because there's usually a period of time where even the developer is not sure who they're going to engage. They're still, it's just in such preliminary stages. So I'm thinking, and then to what Marcus Lang was saying, is maybe what we need is once we sign the HOA to then say within a specific period of time, you will provide us with evidence that you have entered into these agreements with the architect of record, engineer of record, that sort of thing. Because at that stage, you're still looking at our, and what they do to us sometimes is they'll say, and I don't know too many names in here, but anyway, they will say, we have 4 engineers that we're looking at, and they'll list the 4 engineers, and so we're like, okay, they're good, they're all Bahamians, blah, 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 blah. And then after the HOA is signed, we don't see any of those four. So I think that it's a point where maybe in the HOA, we can indicate that you will provide us, maybe within 3 months of that date of the signing of the HOA, with the MOU or some document of proof that these are your various professionals. Because at the end of the day, it is also very hard for them. I have had instances where developers will say they will go to a certain Bahamian professional. It's not about relationships too. Some people just don't work. You know, you just don't want to work for a certain developer. Or a developer doesn't, relationships. It's all about, you know, whether it's the right fit. So I think it's a little unfair to force them the minute they come through the door to say that they're going to work with Marcus Lang. But if we say within 3 months, provide me with evidence that you are working with Ms. Brown, then we're good. So I think that is a point that we could work on and incorporate in our HOAs.
I don't think we're saying work with a particular company. We're saying open it up such that Bahamians will be involved.
Right, but what happens though? They do this. They'll say to us, they have these 4 Bahamians. And then we never hear who the Bahamians are. So
But they have their lawyer already, right? They have their lawyer. I don't think it's
lawyer bashing.
No.
Sensitive.
No, I'm just saying, somehow they were able to identify a legal professional. I don't think it's, and a real estate professional. So I don't think it really, and we're talking about a construction professional because you're doing a construction project. So I don't see where it is a stretch to require that as a part of the heads of agreement. There's a list available. You start interviewing people, and you need to produce a letter from those persons. I'm sorry, I'll go to you next, Rollins. Let's take Quentin.
Yeah, perhaps what you should do is make that a term of the HOA, that they must, by this certain time, after you've signed the agreement, by this, certain time period, you have these certain construction professionals on board. But I want to go back to the current process a bit. I know we kind of touched on it here and there, but you mentioned, this is for Ms. Ferguson, I guess for the gentleman from Grand Bahama also, the government agencies that you interact with. I'd like to know, who are they? I mean, are there a set list? Or do you go to each of these agencies every time? Or is it like you cherry pick which ones you go to depending on the investment, proposed investment? I mean, you could answer now, or you could after. I have 2 more questions.
I'll answer that. So, we have a list, which is a pretty comprehensive list of all the agencies that we would send out for commentary from. So, and it's pretty exhaustive. I mean, I think the only agency that we may not reach out to, and that's if there's not airport or helipad, maybe civil aviation. That's probably the only one that we know, that I can think of, that we don't go to for every single.
The question is, are any of these agencies on the mandatory response list? You just said that sometimes the response are, for want of a better word, haphazard. And I'm wondering whether, you go through all of these agencies, what are the intent? I mean, do you expect a response from every one of them? Or I'm just curious as how it works. And I'm trying to relate it to I'm in the private industry, I think we do things a lot different from what happens in government. And I just wonder what the expectation is when you go to these agencies. What do you expect from them?
When I would have to say, generally, if we have say for example, if we're negotiating an HOA, we would have a mandate from the policymakers, from the cabinet, that we would like to have this agreement signed by, say, the end of this year. We would then, in terms of the negotiations, we would set up certain meetings, and then we would give them a time frame. Please give us our response within a week. Generally speaking, we will get those responses when we have pressed the urgent button. We have there is a formula that we use, and we know how to get responses.
I have a question.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't have the answer to, as far as in our process, when dealing with HOA, as far as time frame, because my department don't deal directly with that. We do have a business development section of the Port Authority that address that matter, but I personally don't have that answer. But that's something I could get to you if needs be.
You also mentioned that we talked about these conceptual plans. Okay, as a consultant engineer, we prepare conceptual plans. Okay, but that requires some investigation. Somebody has to come down here. Well, if these investors they have to hire a consultant somewhere. So somebody has to come to the Bahamas in order to prepare a conceptual plan. Question is, it begs the question: who do they engage these consultants that they hire, probably foreign, somebody local to help them assist in the accumulation of the necessary information, surveys. I mean, I would think that at that point, you know, a consultant, engineer, architect should be engaged. Maybe that's a you know, a location in the process where. Okay, well, what my colleague was saying, we should show the work permit, but.
Yeah, okay. You have one more question, Quentin, because we're running out of time.
I know. So, and then, and I just, again, it's on conceptual plan. You mentioned, it was not clear what level of detail. Again, I'm a consultant engineer. I know when somebody mentions conceptual plan to me, that means something to me. You know, I'm just wondering what level of detail does these conceptual plans entail?
Well, so I think that we kind of covered that, because what we're saying is that, clearly, could you pass the mic to Adrian Rollins, please? I think what we're saying is that there needs to be some specificity as to what they should be providing to you, because I think based on what you're saying, it seems as if depending on who the developer is, you get different things. And this is where we can help. We can help you develop a list of what you should expect and what the developer's Bahamian licensed engineer and architect can, you know, assist them in providing to you so that it's actually useful information. So we're going to do a few more questions until 10, and then we're going to invite Ms. Emma Folks from the Ministry of Public Works to bring remarks, and then we'll go into a break. So Adrian, it's all yours.
All right, we mentioned that when the investors come, they generally have their lawyers. They generally have their lawyers or their real estate persons. We know why that happens. You don't see any foreign persons approaching our bench in the Bahamas, and you can't get any foreign persons to sell any real estate here. And maybe it should be the same thing for the engineers and architects involved. When I'm saying that, I mean, I think that it's now fair to say that if someone's going to make a presentation to the government as an investor, that presentation should be made by a local. Now, if that's a guideline, whoever advises the local, that's between the person making the presentation. That's just it. And I think it's a fair thing to try and achieve. Now, to try and take the design aspect away from the client, that's a bit unreasonable. You know, if I got $100 million, nobody can tell me who is going to design my hotel or my building. But I must know that if whoever designs it, when it comes to the Bahamas, someone else is going to be responsible for it. And that's the person that we should be looking to have that initial investment presentation or feasibility study.
Okay, thanks, Adrian. And for those who don't know, Adrian is the chairman of the Professional Engineers Board. Keith Bishop, our BEAPP vice president, wants to chime in.
Good morning, Keith Bishop. I speak for the environmental consultants.
Closer to your mouth, please.
We estimate that we only get about 20% of our market share. So what? The other 80%. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
The last line of a B word subject to an or a lady show up at immigration. Well, past. In our local consultant is far better suited to talk about these things than somebody that comes from a foreign jurisdiction. So I think a lot more pressure must be put on the government's advisory body. They are the gatekeeper.
Anyone want to respond?
I'm going to take an attempt at responding, because I know Mr. Weish was supposed to have been here, and he would have been able to handle this question very well. I think you weren't here when I spoke earlier, Mr. Bishop, but it is a big lack on the part of the government. And it's something that I think that we're consistently looking at, how we can strengthen and improve the whole monitoring process. Because people can come into this country I think we have to be realistic, depending on how they look, depending on who the immigration officer is at the time, depending on how long they're going to be here or how long they say they're going to be here, they're able to do a lot of work in this country without just slipping past the gatekeepers. The gatekeepers are there. I know in relation to environmental consultants coming in, the process has been, and it's interesting that you say that. If you say 80% of the work is slipping through, we are usually told, and I know the names of a number of you, but I probably can't put the faces to it, but we would see where various persons would say that their outside environmentalists are coming in, so we know that they are in the country. But not everybody tells us. And really, we rely heavily on BEST. BEST is is understaffed, but I think that is an opportunity for just that monitoring to be beefed up so that this 80% slippage, which is pretty high, is taken care of.
Thank you. That 80% is a large sum of money that the government is not collecting on.
Same with the architect and engineer, probably around that, in terms of fees, not quantity of projects. You see, in terms of the percentage of fees being earned, we think it's a very big number. Yes, a lot, millions of dollars. We have time for one last question before I ask Ms. Folks to come to the podium and bring some remarks. Okay, we have a question, okay.
Hi, good morning, everybody. Albrion Simonet. My question is, what is the feasibility of requiring a foreign direct investor to actually get their building permit before actually getting an acceptance and approval from the BIA? Is that a feasible thing, or is that going to scare them away?
I think the difficulty that you will have there is that Ministry of Works, all those various government agencies, they're not even gonna look at a development until they have approval in principle by the NEC.
Yeah, and what you would be, the amount of money that it takes to take a drawing from concept to construction documents, it would really be unfair to ask somebody to do that, and then they're told your project isn't approved. Okay? All right, so I'd like to invite Ms. Emma Folks. First of all, let me thank our panel, Ms. Ferguson and Mr. Francis.